All right, gang, here we go. We've talked about the axial skeleton, and now we're going to move on to the appendicular skeleton. And this is going to be 2 video lessons on appendicular. So let's go ahead and get started with the arm and hand. All right, so next here in the skeletal system, to help you prepare for the bone quizzes, we're going to talk about the appendicular skeleton. Last lesson was axial. This is going to be on the rest of the skeleton, which is the appendicular. The appendicular skeleton, this is basically the limbs and the what are called the girdles that attach the limbs to the axial skeleton. So the appendicular skeleton is made up of 126 bones, and these parts are primarily concerned with movement. As appendages to the central skeletons, these bones include those of the upper and lower limbs, including the girdles that attach them to the axial skeleton. So as you will see, many times you'll have the pelvic and pectoral girdles, and that is in reference to how they are attached to the axial skeleton. So for example, this is an example of the pectoral girdle, and here where it attaches to the base of the spinal column and the sacrum, that is the pelvic girdle. Based on the position of its major joints and component bones, the upper limb is divided into the shoulder, arm, forearm, and hand. The shoulder is the area of the upper limb attachment to the trunk. The arm is the part of the upper limb between the shoulder and the elbow. The forearm is between the elbow and the wrist. And the hand, of course, is, the hand. That's pretty self-explanatory. The bones of the shoulder, also known as the pectoral girdle, include the scapula and clavicle, and the common tongue, that is the shoulder blade and collarbone. But here in anatomy class, we call them by their anatomical names, and that is the scapula and clavicle. The shoulder joint also incorporates the upper part of the humerus, which, as we know from anatomy of the long bone, that is going to be the proximal epiphysis. Some of the key components here in the pectoral girdle: the clavicle is aka the collarbone is here. The scapula, also known as the shoulder blade in its common name. Some parts that we're going to look at, you can see this large process here helps make the ball and socket joint by cupping over top. And this other little process that comes out that we're going to learn its name here shortly comes out here together with this end of the clavicle, all form the cup that would be the socket of that ball and socket joint. The triangular shaped scapula is also called the shoulder blade, again in common terms. There are some components to it that we're going to learn. The scapular spine is the large process on the posterior of the scapula, so it's going to be towards the back. This helps us determine which way the scapula is oriented on the body. The spine has to be facing towards the back, because if it was facing towards the front, it would be up against your rib cage, and that's not going to work. So the smooth, flat surface of the scapula is what rides up against your rib cage or thoracic cavity. The acromion is the flattened lateral portion of the spine. That's one of the ends of the process that make the cup for the ball and socket joint. The coracoid process is a protruding projection on the anterior surface just inferior to the lateral aspect of the clavicle. So it's the one that sticks out more towards the front, and it's going to be found just underneath the clavicle. The glenoid cavity is the smooth, also known as the glenoid fossa, is the smooth, flattened surface that's on the scapula that will articulate with the head of the humerus. So let's take a look at some of those key points. And again, these are going to be highlights on your quiz 1 on your bone tray quiz sheet. So we have the acromion process, which is this end of this large process here. And this part is the spinous process, or the scapular spine. This groove here is called the scapular notch. So if we look at it, we turn it the other way. Here's the acromion process, and the scapular notch is going to be about right there. And then this process is the coracoid process. The smooth, flat surface is the glenoid cavity, or glenoid fossa. We have a couple other components here. We're going to look at the supraspinous fossa. Supra meaning it is superior to the spine. That's this smooth surface here. The infraspinous fossa, or inferior to the spine, is going to be this smooth surface there. This surface that is not labeled, and it's on your quiz sheet, is the subscapular fossa, because this is the surface that lies up against your rib cage. The lateral or axillary border, this is going to be away from the midline of the body, or lateral, because this is a right, as it says here, this is a right scapula. So in this view, we are looking at it from behind the posterior surface. So the shoulder, the head of the humerus, is going to be tucked in here. So the humerus will be hanging here. So the shoulder obviously is lateral. So that means this is going to be your medial or your vertebral border, because your spine is going to be about right here. So it will be the border closest to the spine. The clavicle, aka the collarbone, has a slight S shape to it. The medial end articulates with the manubrium of the sternum, the very top of the sternum, forming the sternoclavicular joint, named because the clavicle and sternum meet to make a joint there. The lateral end articulates with the acromion on the scapula, forming the acromioclavicular joint. So, because this end articulates with the sternum, we call it the sternal end. And because this end articulates with the acromion on the scapula, we call it the acromial end. And then there's a little bump underneath here towards the acromial end that we will identify later. The only bone in the arm is the humerus. And again, when we say arm, we mean the upper arm. The head of the humerus has two projections. They are the greater and lesser tubercle. The greater tubercle lies more laterally, meaning off to the side, and is going to be larger. The lesser tubercle lies more anteriorly, or more towards the front of that bone. Between the tubercles lies the intertubercular groove, or sulcus, also known as the bicipital groove, where the long head of the biceps brachii tendon is located. And that is going to be this guy right there. And that is quite a mouthful. The two bones of the forearm are the radius and the ulna. The radius is lateral in the anatomic position, again, with the palms facing forward, and widens distally. So as the arm will, as it heads towards the wrist, it becomes much larger, much wider at the wrist. The more medial ulna widens proximally, which means it's thicker and wider at the elbow, or proximal, to the olecranon process, a large prominence we feel as the tip of our elbow. So if you bend your elbow and reach up and rub that point of your elbow, what you are rubbing is the olecranon process of your ulna. The diaphysis, or shaft, of the radius and ulna are connected by an interosseous membrane. Inter, short for intermediate, and of course osseous, meaning bone. There is a proximal radio-ulnar joint and a distal radio-ulnar joint where they both meet. Proximally, the head of the radius articulates with the radial notch of the ulna, And that's up by the elbow, and distally the head of the ulna articulates with the ulnar notch of the radius. So here we see a diagram of the elbow. So here's the humerus. This is the distal epiphysis of the humerus, where we see a couple key features, the medial epicondyle. So this is going to be facing the inside of the arm. Here we see the capitulum and the trochlea. Those are the articular surfaces of the humerus that make up your elbow. So those would be the condyles. And then the process above the condyle would be the epicondyle. This is the medial epicondyle, and there's one over on the other side that we can't see. That is the lateral epicondyle. So the head of the radius is right here. That's the very proximal end or proximal epiphysis of the radius, and it articulates with the capitulum of the humerus. And this is the coronoid process, that little point on the inside of the elbow. And then back here, we can't see it, but it's going to tuck in the back, is the olecranon process. And that word is pronounced olecranon. And then right here, this smooth, rounded semicircle, the would be the condyle, the smooth articular surface of the ulna, is referred to as the semilunar, or sometimes called the trochlear notch, because it articulates with the trochlea. And then down here, another part that's on your quiz, this bump down here on the radius is called the radial tuberosity. So here is just the ulna, and we can see the trochlear notch or semilunar notch that I was talking about, and that is this smooth surface right here. And you can see it kind of makes a crescent moon. That's why it's sometimes called the semilunar, because of the crescent moon shape that it has. But it's also because it articulates with the trochlea, sometimes called the trochlear notch. And then right here is this bump, that projection is called the olecranon process. And then this bump down on the front end is called the coronoid process. A little extra part that is not on your list is the radial notch. And that is this groove right here where the ulna and radius articulate with each other. Now we move to the hand. The hand is composed of the wrist, the palm, and the fingers. The wrist, or carpals, the bones in the wrist are collectively referred to as the carpals, is made up of 8 individual carpal bones arranged in 2 rows. The palm of the hand has 5 metacarpals. So when we talk about the hand, there are a lot of bones to make up your hand. So there are 8 here in the wrist, 5 metacarpals, so that's 13. You have 2 phalanges in the thumb, that's 15, plus you have 3 phalanges in each of the fingers. 3 times 4 is 12. 12 and 15 would be a grand total of 27 bones in your hand and wrist. Each finger, with the exception of the thumb, or what is called the first digit, is composed of 3 phalanges. We have the one closest to your arm is known as the proximal phalanx. Phalanx is the term used to talk about a single bone. So phalanges is plural, phalanx is singular. The intermediate, sometimes called the intermediate phalange, is in between the proximal and the one out of the end, which would be the distal phalange. So here on this slide, they call it the middle phalanx, but in a lot of books, a lot of texts, you will see this referred to as the intermediate, because it is in between the 2 other phalanges. The joints of the hand include the carpometacarpal, the carpometacarpophalangeal, and the interphalangeal joints. And now we'll look at the individual carpals that we have here. There are 8. Again, in no particular order, they are the pisiform, the triquetrium, the trapezoid, the trapezium, the capitate, hamate, lunate, and scaphoid. So you may be wondering, how am I ever going to remember all of those bones? Well, it just so happens that down here in the little blue rectangle, you are given what is called a mnemonic device to help you remember the order of those bones. So here's how it goes. You take the first letter of those carpals and you rearrange them to make a sentence that the first letter of each word start with the first letter of each carpal. Okay, so the mnemonic device is stop letting those people touch the cadaver's hand. And this is the order that they go in. Stop is for scaphoid, letting lunate, those triquetrium, people pisiform, touch trapezium, the trapezoid, cadavers capitate, hand hamate. And that's how you remember. Now, there are 3 that start with a T, so that can be confusing, but I have ways to help you remember. So here's how it goes. You start by, and it all depends on if you go palm up or palm down. Now, the pisiform is very small, and it fits right up tight up against underneath the triquetrium, okay? So what you do is you find the thumb, you skip one and go to the bone, the first row that make the articulation between the arm bones. So basically the wrist joint, and you start with that one. So that's stop, which is scaphoid, and it simply goes this way. So here's the first one at the thumb, skip it, start here with number 1, and it goes scaphoid, lunate, triquetrium, and on top of that one is the small little pisiform. So you can see triquetrium pisiform. So stop letting those people. So that's scaphoid, lunate, triquetrium pisiform. And now you have the other 2 that start with a T, trapezium, trapezoid. So trapezium rhymes with thumb. So the one that touches at the base of the thumb is the trapezium. So then we go trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, hamate. And when you actually look at the hamate's going to have this little post on it that makes a little hook. And so I say the hamate's got the hook, and that helps you remember. So if we flip over and we go from the other side, we look at, palm down. We can't really see the pisiform on this side because it lies underneath, but it is, you can see there's a line here for pisiform, but there is no line here, but it would be underneath there on the far side. So if we walk through it again, we skip the thumb and we go scaphoid, lunate, triquetrium, pisiform, trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, hamate. Boom. Just like that. And that is going to do it for video lesson 1 on the appendicular skeleton. All right, that's all I have for you on video lesson 1 over the arm and the hand and the wrist. So let's go ahead and close on out of here. And if you have any questions, as always, shoot me an email and let me know. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But if not, thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.